and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, which is brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. I'm your host, Jessica, but far more excitingly with me, this week we have Ben. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. For those of us that aren't familiar with you and what you do in RPGs, could you give us a little intro and tell us about yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm Ben Wallace, also known as That Gamer Priest, sometimes on social media. I am an Episcopal priest or an Anglican priest, you might say. And in addition to that, I also work in tabletop role-playing games, obviously, which is why I'm here. I am the co-founder of the All Ports Open Network. The All Ports Open Network has been around since 2017, doing like streams, podcasts, and making content around TTRPGs. And we recently launched Apon Games, our analog game division of the All Ports Open Network. So I've been doing things over the years, like co-hosting a dating and romance actual play podcast with my spouse Mel, doing other hosting other actual play podcasts, doing interview shows. Like I have a Monday night TTRPG talk show, kind of like a little bit like this one, and we recently have started publishing and releasing our own games as Apon Games, which is really exciting.
Amazing. So it sounds like you're quite a busy person doing lots of things in tabletop RPGs. Specifically for this next hour, we're going to be talking about your game Broken, which is a tragic romance game, which I'm very excited to talk about because this is a two-player game and it's I think something so different for a lot of people that haven't tried a lot of different indie tabletop RPGs. So I'm really excited to dig in and talk about that in a bit. But before I get carried away and talk about that, I always start by digging into the guest backgrounds a little bit. So you give us a little bit of snippet about you there, Ben, but it would be great to know a little bit more about your history with RPG. So what was kind of the first RPG you remember playing? What was your first gaming experience?
Oh yeah, I remember very well. My first tabletop RPG was D&D. And the irony now
Classic
that I'm here today on this show. It's funny. But yeah, it was actually 3rd edition D&D. I started playing like right around the time 3rd edition came out. So around year, I think it's like 2000. And it was like a very kind of embarrassingly stereotypical story of like playing in my best friend's basement, Friday nights. Like late night, like burning incense, playing D&D, being ridiculous, and that was kind of how I got into it. We were playing other games back then besides D&D 2 pretty quickly, and eventually started playing a lot of different like more smaller press games, playing things like Savage Worlds, playing other generic systems that were out there, and then eventually discovering indie TTRPGs, and I've been playing and making content around games ever since.
Amazing. What were some of the first kind of indie tabletop RPGs that you discovered and played?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I guess we started. I'm trying to think if I know the actual answer to that. I like I said, I remember playing Savage Worlds was something we got pretty into for a while. That's obviously a small press game, and we started playing, I guess, actual indie games kind of around the time that the story game revolution was happening, and we were playing Powered by the Apocalypse games a lot for a while, and that was probably when I really started to dig into indie games. And so yeah, I would say games like Dungeon World, games like Masks, games like, and that's so pretty recent history. I don't know if I remember the actual first indie game I played.
No, that's fine. I think there's so many different games out there, which is I'm such an advocate for on this show. It's what I'm trying to beat my drum and say. And I think, don't get me wrong, D&D is absolutely great, and I do see it on this show. Despite having a show called Not D&D, I do actually like D&D. Like we made Level Up Advanced 5th edition at EN Publishing, but I think indie games can sometimes explore a different side of things, which I'm kind of excited to get into. Kind of talking about. Broken, a tragic romance. So you kind of gave us a summary of the things that you do in tabletop RPGs, but how did that start? When did you start, like, instead of just being somebody that plays them and enjoys them, being somebody that starts making content and making games? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so it actually kind of started with video games first a number of years before. It was back probably in like 2000, 9, 10, 11 in that time period. We were
Mm-hmm.
my current partner, Josh, my APON co-founder, and I
Mm-hmm.
were doing a different video game podcast called No Avatars Allowed, and
Mm-hmm.
we did a lot of media stuff around that, and covered things like PAX, and that was pre PAX Unplugged. And then
Mm-hmm.
I live in the Philadelphia area, which is where PAX Unplugged happens, which is a pretty big tabletop convention here in the States. And we in 2017 we went to the first PAX Unplugged. I just remember we kind of got we hadn't been in doing anything press related in a long time, and I just remember
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting bit by the bug to get back into it's kind of the gaming industry, but from a more of a tabletop perspective. Although we also did
Sure.
bring back our video game podcast at that time, and so we decided to launch All Ports Open Network, and that was in 2017. We launched like 5, I think, podcasts right out the bat when the website launched. And then that's kind of how we got back into it. I
Mm-hmm.
had this idea, a crazy idea, to do a romance and relationship actual play with my spouse, and we
Uh-huh.
started playing like all of these duet, 2-player relationship and dating role playing games, and like telling stories, and then like creating our own fictional world for them to take place. And I just
Sure.
spent the last like 5 years really being immersed in a lot of those kinds of games, which is partially
Mm-hmm.
what led to me writing one of them.
That makes perfect sense. I've actually never played a two-player role-playing game, which is why I was so intrigued by your game, and I wanted to kind of learn more about that. So, when you're playing a two-player kind of role-playing game, how does that differ from playing with a larger group table?
Yeah, it really depends on a lot of factors too, because
Mm-hmm.
there are a number of different ways to play as 2 players.
Mm-hmm.
You could do a GM and player sort of situation where
Sure.
it's like looks a little bit more like a traditional maybe TTRPG, so people are familiar with. So something like you could do D&D as a duet game.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be, and I've done D&D as a duet game actually
Oh, really?
with my spouse.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially during the COVID period when we were like in
Of
lockdown,
course.
we
Yeah.
played D&D together. And
Mm-hmm.
when you do like in that style, it just kind of, it's really fun and it's not hard. The thing about taking a game that's not designed for duet play and doing it as a duet, it
Mm-hmm.
just sort of takes a little bit of adaptation. It's like
Sure.
whether that's you're heavy handed with your use of NPCs, like you maybe
Yeah.
have GM controlled NPC that's like a really big part of the story, but still is not the protagonist. You let your player be, your one player be the protagonist.
Of course.
And it just kind of changes the way you do storytelling in that environment too, where you do really have one protagonist of your story instead of
Mm-hmm.
like a party. And I really like playing games like that, like whether it's Dungeon World or like a fantasy game like Dungeon World or D&D, or whether that's like there's like you could really adapt almost anything to that kind of way of playing. And then the other way of playing, of course, is something more like Broken, my game, which
Mm-hmm.
is we say, using sort of gaming terminology, we say it's a duet cooperative game, because it's
Okay. Yeah.
a GM-less duet cooperative game, because there is no GM. You're both equal players.
Mm-hmm.
The game guides you both through the process of playing, and in this case, and you are playing to tell the best story possible. So, when you were asking about early games that I was playing that were indie games, some of
Mm-hmm.
the really early indie games we were playing that didn't pop into my mind when you asked me a minute ago were the games Dread and Ten
Yeah.
Candles, which are both horror games.
Uh-huh.
We've played a lot of those games in my circle, and Ten Candles in particular was very influential on me writing Broken. That's another game where like you are working together when you're playing. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
two-player game, obviously, but you're working together to tell a really good story. So in Broken,
Yeah.
the two people are meeting each other at the table. You're kind of equal in the way you
Mm-hmm.
are. There's no power differential. There's no GM and player. You're both telling a story together using the tools of the game and the rules of the game.
Sure. Mhm. I definitely have to get 10 Candles on this show because last week that was a game recommendation by our last week's guest, and you've mentioned it now, so we definitely have to get them on. So I'm making a mental note for that.
There you go.
But it feels like we're naturally moving into talking about Broken now, so I'm gonna
Sure.
take us on to talk about that. So could you give us like a little elevator pitch, a summary of how you describe this game to people?
Absolutely, yeah. So Broken is as I said, 2-player storytelling game about broken hearts, breakups. It's a breakup game. You tell the story of a relationship going through a breakup and about breaking real life physical objects. So it
Yes.
is a ritual and artifact based game. And if people are kind of newer to games, that might sound intimidating. But really, what
Mhm.
that means is that you play the game through a series of 10 scenes. You
Yeah.
collect 10 physical objects that you bring to the table. They work as story prompts or scene prompts. And together, you kind of tell the story of 10 scenes in a relationship working towards a breakup. And at the end of each scene, you break the physical object
Yes.
that is the scene prompt. And it's a ritual game that plays with themes like memory and identity. So you're becoming slowly disillusioned with the other person that you're in a relationship with. And the last scene of the game is your breakup always. And like I said, it's a tragic game,
Mhm.
because it always ends that way. It always ends with the last scene being your breakup.
So there's no happy endings in this story.
In this story, there's no there's never a happy ending. Well, there might be. I mean, the happy ending is kind of not for the couple. You're not going to end with a
Not
happy
yeah.
couple. But maybe you tell a story where the happy ending is that the characters they needed to break up, or
Yeah.
something along those lines. So yeah, or maybe it's the empathy building and the kind of learning processing you get while you're playing the game, or something could be
Yeah.
a happy ending.
Yeah, this is absolutely my sort of game. I love the idea of that. For me, I love tabletop role playing games that explore connection and relationships, and that's 100% what this game is about. And
Yeah.
even though you're playing like a couple going through a breakup every game, there's so many different ways you can do that. And I love the idea of the prompts of breaking things as well. And someone was saying in the comments, they're agreeing as well, that tabletop RPGs today differ wildly from the games they're playing in the 18s and 90s. That's more traditional ones. But yeah, so I'm very excited to talk about this. So to give myself a little bit direction, because I'm a bit excited, I'm going to go back and talk about the inspiration for this game. So you
Yeah.
kind of mentioned how you play a lot of games with your spouse, and that you play a lot of duet games already.
Yeah.
But one thing I noticed that was interesting when I was reading up about the game, you have written this tragic game, but you describe yourself as a hopeless romantic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the juxtaposition there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so I definitely think I'm a hopeless romantic. I love romance genre. Like, literally before we streamed, I was trying to finish an episode of a reality show I was watching, because I've been watching bad reality TV
Yeah.
as I've been doing the campaign for Broken, because like I'm listening to so many actual plays of it and hearing all
Yeah.
these breakups, and I want something else.
You
So
want
I've been,
something happy.
which is actually, reality TV is not the best place to find that, as I've been learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm a hopeless romantic for sure. And in the book, I talk about how the book for Broken, I talk about how it's both a game and a memoir of sorts, because the real inspiration for the game is that I married my high school sweetheart, and we went through a painful divorce process, and I had my own breakup experience. And when I was processing and healing from that, I at some point had this realization that in order, as I said at the beginning of the show, I'm also a priest, a pastor of a church. And I thought about like taking my experience of divorce and doing some sort of writing around it, kind of from like a churchy perspective or a theological one. And but what I eventually came through my processing to realize is that what I really wanted to do to process was to create a game. And as I said, I've been playing lots and lots of uh, romance, two-player relationship, dating, role-playing games. And although in 2017 there were much fewer of them than there are today, there's way more games along those lines now than there were then. But anyway, I just wanted to give people the tools to tell their own kind of breakup stories, or tragic romance
Yeah.
stories, or divorce stories. And maybe like for me, writing Broken was part of my healing process. The whole craft of writing it, the whole act of like creating the game, play testing it, crafting the rules for it, was part of my healing process from my breakup. And my hope was that it would create tools that not everybody that plays the game would use for that reason. But that's somebody else
Mhm.
out there like me who's had their own breakup experience. They might play this game and find it a little bit cathartic, a little bit healing, a little bit
Yeah.
processing. And other people might, have some empathy building for what it's like to go through that kind of a breakup experience. And most people have had some sort of breakup experience in their lives, so
Yeah.
people can relate to it.
Definitely. And yeah, I think, yeah, like you were saying, I think with breakups and things, sometimes there's the sadness of the relationship between the two people, but then I think sometimes depending on what your hopes and aspirations were for that relationship, and what your personal beliefs are about breaking up or divorce, which can be informed by your culture or your faith or all these different things, can make it such a different experience for different people as well. So I imagine this game is hugely replayable, and if you're role playing different characters in different situations, it would be so different.
Yeah,
um
for sure.
but to dive into the actual game, so how it
Yeah,
works mechanically, you talked about objects and things that people are going to break.
yeah,
But I noticed in the rules you said as well, if people were afraid of this, and
yeah.
they can do popsicle sticks instead. So if some people were
Oh,
thinking,
I was
am
about
I
to
going to have
grab
to
mine.
smash my stuff?
I
I
was about
came
to grab mine. You
prepared.
got one. You beat me to it.
I did my research. I came prepared. I
Yeah.
just have one though. um
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, could you talk about the idea for like the physically breaking the objects, because obviously there's great symbolism there for their game, but how did you come up with that idea? And
Yeah, it's this idea that was staring me right in the face while I was designing the game. The game's actually older and the name of the game is older than breaking physical objects. I had done a lot of the writing for the game. I had worked on
Mhm.
the game and gotten it to where a lot of the ritual that's in the game now, like the way you frame scenes. There's a ritual when you frame scenes that one person says, "Remember when," and then sets
Mhm.
the scene, and the other person says, "But you forgot about," and adds like a twist on that, and then you kind of role play out that scene. But I had been encouraged by folks who were kind of involved in playtesting or heard playtests that
Mhm.
they thought that for people who are newer to role playing games, or maybe are newer to storytelling games, maybe they come out of the more of a D&D background, that it might be a
Mhm.
little challenging for them to know how to set scenes. So I had been wrestling
Yeah.
with a way to like write scene prompts into the game.
Mhm.
And at some point, it just kind of dawned on me. It was like staring me in the face that the name of the game was broken. I'll just say this. I really wanted to design a game where the actual rules and the way you play, the mechanics, kind of
Mhm.
mirror the themes and the like content of the game. So I really want that's what I longed for in designing this game, and I
Yeah.
had to like set it aside for a little while, um, and kind of get some distance from it so that I could kind of have that breakthrough. And then I just kind of had a breakthrough where I was like, oh my gosh, it's like staring me right in the face that the scene prompts are these objects, and then you actually break them, and then what you're left behind with is this pile of broken memories basically. And it just captured what I wanted the game to be so much that it was like so obvious to me once I realized it. So yeah, and then I wanted to be aware of the fact that there are people who maybe they didn't want to break physical objects.
Mhm.
The book talks a lot about like how you can collect them and how you can even turn that part of it into its own game, like going with your play partner to a thrift store or to a
Yeah.
yard sale to buy the objects to play together, or maybe you both separately kind of go off and buy your objects.
Mhm.
So I've really just come to love that process. uh, Listening to other people play,
Yeah.
actual plays has been really fun because I get to listen to their experience of doing it. And like I even one of the shows that did an actual play did a random grab bag. They just took a ton of different objects they got from a thrift store, put them in a bag,
Okay.
and then drew them blind for their scene setting, which I thought was a
Mhm.
really interesting twist. But yeah, I knew that I wanted to create like an alternative way in case people didn't want to break objects. So
Mhm.
that was kind of obvious to me and easy, which was the popsicle stick thing. You're
Yeah.
write an object on the popsicle stick, and then you kind of snap it or break it.
Yeah.
At the end of I just broke mine for the people who aren't. And you break it at the end of the scene. And like
Mhm.
what's really cool about that is that I mean I didn't do it for this reason, but like now that I've had so many listened to and played so many games with broken,
Mhm.
what I realize is like they're two really cool but different ways of playing, because when people
Mhm.
get objects, like the gathering of the objects becomes such its own part of play.
Yeah.
then, like with the creating of objects on the popsicle sticks, you can write anything on those
Hmm.
popsicle sticks. So people have come out with the craziest stuff or the most like really personal things for their game. So it's just kind of like made it a very different way of playing,
Yeah,
that are both equally awesome, and like, but they're each way is its own experience, if that makes sense.
definitely. Do you have any examples of some objects that prompted some really nice stories you'd like to share with us? Maybe from games and playtesting or games from actual plays you've seen?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite objects we've broken is we found a tiny cello that was also a music box that played the song "My Heart Will Go On" from Titanic.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And that was like so on the nose. Like it was just like the most perfect. I was like, this object was destined for a game of Broken one day. And my it's funny because my oldest child is a cellist, and she
Okay.
was like really mad at me for breaking that tiny cello. She was very upset with me. But it was a really good object and a really good scene prompt. In one of the
Hmm.
games that I played on stream, we did like a magical girl themed game, like an anime style magical girl themed game.
Okay, yeah.
And one of our objects we created on the popsicle sticks was a volcano, which is probably the
Okay.
most outlandish object that we've made.
Yeah.
Um, and recently, the Party of One podcast episode Playing Broken came out, and one of the physical objects they broke on that was a VHS of the film Rocky. And if anybody knows Jeff
Okay.
Stormer and that show Party of One, he lives in Philadelphia, so as I do, so it hit really close to home to smash a VHS
Hmm.
tape. They smashed it. I wasn't in that game of Rocky,
Yeah.
so those are just some cool ones that are memorable.
Yeah. I love this concept because I think something about it feels like forbidden or like you shouldn't, like you're doing
Yeah,
something bad to break something. Because
yeah,
like especially with like games, if something's a game component, you don't want to break it. I had a game where the GM as a puzzle had made this little clay pot and it had a clue inside it, and we had it with a party for weeks and we were meant to smash it, but it didn't occur to us that we should break something because we've been given this prop, and we wouldn't. And then later we realized, like, can we break it? And they were like, yep, and gave us a hammer, and it was like, oh, and it was such a moment of like, I can break it. And I think this game has the exact same moment, that you're allowed to break something, you're allowed to do this. Something about that just feels really fun. Like for me, when I read this, I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to bring like a plate or something.
yeah.
The idea of smashing a plate would just feels like so like cathartic, and
Oh yeah.
it's not something I do on purpose generally. So
So, yeah,
yeah.
I would say the most fun objects to break are definitely the ones you can smash. And
Yeah.
so, like, those are like if you're just playing this at home. Like now, I've been doing a lot for content recently, obviously, like on streams and stuff. But if you're just like playing at home, like taking what was the one I'm trying to remember? Oh, we got a savings bowl, like the kind of thing you would save for retirement. It's a like retirement fund on the side,
Oh yeah.
and yeah, that was really fun to like just sort of hold above my head and smash down on the sidewalk and into a billion pieces. It's really cathartic. And the other thing that's cool about it is it like releases the tension because you're playing a breakup game. So you
Mhm.
are like having arguments with your like in character between the two characters, and you're like fighting with each other or like doing these things that can be kind of tense. And then you get to do this like super fun release action of like breaking a thing, and it really does help kind of pace the game out and not just make it like it's what makes it helps it make it fun,
Yeah.
keep it from being like a miserable experience of like arguing with somebody or break as you're breaking up with them.
Mhm. Um, yeah, I love the breaking things mechanic. I think it's wonderful in the game. But I will move us on to talk about other mechanics in the game.
Sure.
So as you mentioned, these 10 objects kind of prompt the structure of the game for the different scenes. Could you talk
Yeah.
about how you set up those scenes? You kind of mentioned the phrases before for how you
Yeah.
frame that and set that up.
Yeah, so in the game, you end up at the beginning of the game when you make your characters. It's kind of like a
Mhm.
reverse engineered character creation. Like
Mhm.
usually in games, like you give your character attributes and you describe things about your character. Whereas in Broken, you actually kind of make traits for the your traits are actually kind of about the other person. So
Okay.
you make traits that are like things you are attracted to about the other person, or that you like about being with them, or that you like about your relationship. So one of my traits might be I love his dark brown eyes, or he would never tell me a lie, or like
Mhm.
I feel infinitely trusted in this relationship. Those are things that could be, traits that you would write down. And
Yeah.
you write down 5 of these traits. You both have 5 of them. And every scene, you're going to try to move the story towards so I should repeat the part about the how you frame the scene. So
Yeah.
when you're framing the scenes, you're actually playing your 10 scenes out. One of
Mhm.
you goes first by picking one of the physical objects and using it as kind of like inspiration for the scene. So if it's the plate you wanted to smash, it could be a nice dinner. Maybe your first date was at a restaurant. And
Mhm.
so the first person would pick up the plate, say, okay, I'm going to use the plate as my inspiration for the scene. And
Mhm.
then start by saying, remember when. So I might say, remember when we had our first date at the Olive Garden. I don't know why I
Mhm.
picked Olive Garden, but that's
Why not? It's accessible. Yeah.
remember when we had our first date at the Olive Garden and wore a really, really standout, memorable tie, like a really, like I was really surprised. But the other person then adds a twist to that, like they say, but you forgot about, and then adds some sort of twist, like you forgot about how. Let's see, it's a first date, so it's probably gonna be something fairly lighthearted, like, but you forgot about how you kept looking at your phone the whole date, and just kind of, it was fun, but we just never quite bonded the way I was hoping in that date because you just kept looking at your phone the whole time. And so
Okay.
as this, and then you would like role play that scene out, and you would try to move the scene towards one of you becoming disillusioned with your top trait that you have showing in the 5 traits that you had created.
Mhm.
And once someone is disillusioned with it, they say, I used to think, and then you would read that trait and you would burn it with like you have a candle lit, you would burn it or you would tear it up, and then you break the object, so you would smash the plate, and then and that can happen at any time. Anytime either of you feels like you have become disillusioned with that thing, no matter what's happening in the scene ends right there, and you say, I used to think, and you end the scene and you do that. um, and yeah, so like I said, you can role play out the scene. But what's really been interesting about Broken for me, as like the creator of the game, watching people play it and listening to people play it, and me being in all these different plays of the game, is that you don't really even have to like do the traditional role play thing where you kind of
Okay.
both role play out your characters. I was in an actual play stream with somebody recently where we ended up just kind of naturally, this is kind of the way we played, like it just was what felt natural to us. We kind of did more of like a descriptive thing. We described it, like rather than
Yeah.
like embodying the characters and playing as them. We kind of described the events of the relationship and how we ended up breaking up together, and it was a really fun way of playing. So the game has a lot of flexibility for the kinds of stories and ways of playing you can
Mhm.
do with it.
I mean, I love it. This is totally my game. I'm just so gonna be playing this.
Oh,
I
that's
was
good.
thinking,
Yeah.
I'm playing a different role playing game, and
Yeah.
our 2 characters in it have like quite an angsty emotional relationship. And I was thinking, after the campaign, we could play this with the characters of that game, using this to kind of get some closure on that. But anyway, it's just another idea I
Yeah.
had.
No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. People keep saying that to me. The people
Mm.
you're like, some other people have said the same thing to me where they've said, I have this other game I'm playing and I would love to use Broken to like break up these characters. Or actually one of our play tests
Mm.
was actually 2 D&D characters, and
Yeah.
they weren't romantic. They were just in a party together, but they had gone their separate ways, and they decided to use Broken in their play test to like do a deeper dive into that and like why
Yeah.
they ended up going their separate ways. So speaking of the flexibility, it's been amazing to me to see the way people play
Mhm.
different kinds of stories, even not romantic stories with it.
Yeah, yeah, I guess of course, because I suppose any relationship can break down and have issues and things. So that
Absolutely.
makes perfect sense. With this scene you talked about there, you mentioned the first person with the first prompt said like a positive thing about it, and then the second person did like a negative twist. Is that the structure for all of them, or was that just an example for the way it could be done? Or
Yeah, that's basically the structure of how you basically do
Mhm.
that for 9 scenes, and then the last
Mhm.
scene, the breakup scene, you don't
Mhm.
repeat that ritual. Instead, you both remember the thing the same way. Because I find that with relationships, especially ones that are going through difficulty or whether they're broken up. When people are having relationship problems, a lot of times they don't remember their fights the same way, or even
Okay.
like remember their days the same way. Like might remember a date being awesome and having just a great time, and
Yeah.
the other person might remember it very differently than that. And so
Yeah.
9 of the 10 scenes give you that experience. But the 10th scene, the breakup scene, the idea is anyway that mechanically that you remember it the same way. So you decide together, okay, where does it happen? When does it happen? How does it happen? You do use your 10th object as a prompt for it, but you kind of decide how to do that together. And then you know, basically go through the process of having the breakup conversation.
Yeah. Oh. Um, sorry, I'm just thinking of all the different stories you can tell with this. My mind's going with it. So how would you recommend pacing the game, or what guidance do you have in the book? Or because obviously you've got 10 scenes, so you don't want to like escalate really quickly and then have nowhere to kind of go. So how do you manage that as a player?
Yeah, so we invite people to basically when they create their 5 traits each at the beginning of the game for their characters, to simply you're going to put them in a stack, and you're going to only ever have one showing at a time for each of you. And so when we kind of give the game has a really interesting way of pacing itself out, because as you're kind of new to, I've heard people play and seen playtests where people got into fights, pretty massive fights immediately in the first scene.
Amazing,
But
great.
naturally, most people that come to the game don't do that. They kind of naturally kind of start telling the story, because even if they're playing characters that have been together forever, like this is the first scene you're playing, so it's pretty natural to kind of like ease into it and kind of
Yeah.
let the story take you. But we do encourage people to stack those 5 traits from kind of the like least serious to the most serious, so that you can kind of like help each other craft like the story you want to tell. So like if my stack has the thing I said before about the like his dark brown eyes are just really alluring or whatever is one of my traits, and one of the other traits is like he would never tell me a lie. I would probably put that one towards the bottom of the stack, because I know that's going to be a big fight to become disillusioned with that one. Whereas the brown eyes or something, it might not take as much to become disillusioned with it. But the people playing the game, it's your story to tell, and so if you can kind of tell it how you want to, and if you want to tell the story of two people that are like fighting a lot right away from the beginning, then you can. But the game kind of paces itself out. The other mechanic the game uses is it uses a message or voicemail mechanic. After the first 3 scenes, you go aside from each other, like in real life, and you record a voicemail message for the other person. So you can like take your phone and like leave them a message on it, and that's meant to be kind of like early in kind of the like you're still at that point reveling a little bit in kind of the new relationship energy. Again, even if like your characters aren't experiencing new relationship energy, as players you are, because you've only done 3 of these scenes, so you're pretty new to it. So kind of getting to know each other in the relationship, the fictional relationship. And then after the 10th scene, once you've had the breakup, the last thing that happens is you play those messages back for each other for the first time, so that you hear them. And that's the way the game ends. And that kind of itself helps with that arc we were talking about before too, because when you leave that message, you're still in that mindset of like, I'm trying to make this relationship work in character. Out of character as a player that's going to break up, but in character you're like, oh,
You're
I'm
in
sorry
it,
about this fight. I really hope that we can like have a good weekend together. So, I don't know, something along those lines.
Yeah.
It helps with the pacing also.
Yeah. I'm just wondering I'm just wanting to hear stories about it now. So I'm just going to ask about playtesting. Like, how long did playtesting take, and what was that process like? And also, if you have any great little stories and moments you'd like to share with us from playtesting.
Sorry, a really memorable
Immediately,
one.
yes.
But so playtesting took a while. Like we've been working on this game. The idea for the game popped into my head, like started to germinate pretty quickly after we started doing Pot of Love, which is my podcast I was talking about.
Mhm.
and we're playing relationship and romance games. And so we kind of started playtesting it not too long after that, and we even recorded an actual playtest for Pot of Love before You Were Breaking Objects, even as a theme. So
Okay.
the process took a long time. We invited other people into it, had other people play the game, and like basically just play the game, give us their feedback, listen to plays of the game, give us their feedback, and read various versions of the rules and give us their feedback. Um, and yeah, it was a really good process. It was really helpful to take, and we're still in some ways in that process because the version of the game that's out there now really is like it is the game. It's what we've been playing, and someone could easily, if they back the itch funding for the game today, they would get the version of the rules that everyone's playing, a full color version of the book, ebook. Um, but we are between that and the final version, once it's funded, there'll be even more tweaking. So we're still in the process of like making probably less substantive ones in some ways than we used to, but still listening to that feedback, still listening to the play testing to kind of refine the game and refine the rules. But there was some really interesting ones. The
Mhm.
one I mentioned that was like people playing D&D characters was really interesting just because of how different it was.
Yeah.
But somebody played sorry, it's hard for me to even say it without laughing. Somebody played Benjamin Franklin, the historical figure, and
Okay.
his childhood best friend, which was a talking raccoon, I think it was. It was an animal for
Okay,
sure.
didn't see that coming. Right,
I
okay.
know, right? Either did I. Either did I. And they played their breakup, and it was even a like murder, or it was even like a murder conspiracy, like assassination subplot line in their story where they were like the talking animal was going to assassinate George Washington or something. It was just like so out there, so different. And I just remember thinking like, wow. And they still really enjoyed it, and they still had a pretty vicious breakup with a lot of arguing at the end. So I thought, wow, this game can tell definitely a wide variety of stories, depending
Yeah.
on who's playing it.
The tone of that is very different as well, because immediately I went to my little angsty melodramatic mindset because of
Yeah,
who I am as a person, probably.
yeah.
But it sounds like you can also play quite a light-hearted, because I imagine that was quite comical.
It
That example
was
you just
very
gave. Yes.
It
Okay.
it's funny because it was comical, right, like, there was even people watching it played, and, so everyone was kinda laughing, and they were
Mhm.
kinda, like, being silly, but the, like, fighting ha in character arguing, it's interesting how you can kinda laugh at something and be silly about it, but then also, like, really pretend to fight in a way that feels more real, and so it did kind of slip
Mhm.
into, like, some moments of true to life arguing,
Yeah.
even though the like scenario itself was really, kind of silly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I learned from that too that it is possible to play a more lighthearted version of Broken. Although most versions of the game I've seen played,
Yeah.
even if they start out more lighthearted, they get dark by the end.
I mean, I imagine just because of the nature of the
Yeah,
topic. I mean, and speaking to that as well, you mentioned in the book you have about safety tools and mechanics.
yeah.
So it'd be great to talk a little bit about that, about what you advise for people approaching this game and how we play it safely and make sure everyone's enjoying it.
Yeah, so safety tools are definitely hugely important, and we knew they were going to be for designing this game. And so I talk about safety tools in the book. I talk about
Hmm.
recommending people to use the X card. If people
Hmm.
don't know what that is, it's a X on a card that you put on the table, and you can touch it at any time to say, "I want to stop
Hmm.
what's happening in the game and move on from it." I talk about lines and veils in the book, but we
Yeah.
actually one of the things that we're still working on is safety tools because one of the
Okay.
things we're funding through the itch funding campaign is our safety design. So the
Hmm.
creator of the safety tool set script change is Bo Sheldon of Thoughty Games, and Bo is actually our safety designer and consultant on the game. So that's
Okay.
still one of the things that we're working on right now, because what we're going to do is kind of take script change tools, which are based very familiar to people because it's concepts people are really familiar with from like watching. Well, if you're like me and you grew up watching VHS tapes and DVDs, I guess it's the
Hmm.
same on stream. But they're like rewind, fast forward, pause, like
Hmm.
you're watching something. And those are actually the tools. You can like rewind, you
Mhm.
can pause, you can say, I want to fast forward through this. It's familiar concepts that work as safety tools. And we're gonna like
Mhm.
layer those safety tools into Broken so that they become a seamless part of the game and the mechanics. And aren't as maybe disruptive to the rules as say like the X card is, because the X
Mhm.
card is a great tool that I really
Yeah.
like and use a lot. But I don't think it's probably the best tool for Broken because it is a very kind of disruptive and jarring safety tool that like takes you right out of the game when you use it. And the hope is that by layering in the script change tools and like writing custom tools for Broken, that
Mhm.
we'll end up with a game that helps people have a good experience. It's really important in a game like this where you can delve into like serious and emotional stuff to
Yeah.
like kind of be respectful of each other at the game table,
Mhm.
to be aware of that, to like talk with the person you're playing with, to make sure you want to have the same kind of experience and you want to
Yeah.
approach the subject matter the same way. And that's to me the most important safety tool is like
Yeah.
respect and like listening. And then the tools themselves, they help you to have to create that environment
Mhm.
and to keep that environment that way. But like it starts with definitely having a conversation, especially if someone wants to play this game and really get into some topics that are close to their own personal real life experiences.
Yeah.
And one of the things we talk about is the idea of bleed, which is kind of a LARP, kind
Mm.
of comes out of the LARP community.
Yep.
But this idea of like my real life experiences, like we obviously designed wanting to give the framework where some bleed can happen so that you can do some
Mhm.
processing of your own breakup experiences. And whenever you have bleed involved, I just think it's really important to talk about that with the person you're playing with. So like if you
Definitely.
want to have a game where you're like touching on your real life experiences, the book talks about making sure that you discuss that with the person you're playing with so that they're not just sort of surprised into that kind of situation.
Yeah, and with like bleed between the player and the character, so those emotions becoming, just for people unfamiliar with the term, I'm familiar with that from LARPing, and I think it's really important to look after other players when you notice that. I had a game I was playing the other week with some friends, and we were doing a scene, and actually the game master noticed one of the other players. We were doing a subject that they knew and their personal life was close, and the player was like kind of enjoying and having fun, but they paused the scene. They're like, I'm just going to pause this scene for a moment, come out of it, and they took the player inside and spoke to them. They're like, oh, actually, yeah, I hadn't spotted that, but now I've stepped away from the situation. I can see I need a break. So I think with character bleed, it's not just sometimes safety tools talk about, oh, as a player, you need to say what you don't like and put your hand up and do that. But I
Yeah,
think the best ones is where we're all looking out for each other in
yeah,
that way as well and spotting
absolutely.
things in advance. So it's
Yeah,
great to hear that's an important part kind of the game. And you mentioned you are crowdfunding right now as we
yeah.
speak. And I'm sure everyone that's been listening to this has been like, well, I need to go and purchase this game. So could you, I put the link in the chat, and if you're listening to the podcast, it's in the show notes. So could you talk to us about the campaign and where you are and what's going on with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we are doing this live right now, the game
Uh-huh.
is crowdfunding on Itch. We're using an Itch funding model as an alternative to Kickstarter to
Mm-hmm.
fund a digital version, an ebook version of the game. And we did fund the final, like the full version of the game to pay
Woo!
for. Yeah, it's really exciting. We actually funded within 25 hours. We missed 24 hours by
Nice.
1 hour. So we really leaned into it. We've been leaning into the joke that we
Yeah,
funded in
yeah.
hours. And
Amazing.
yeah, so we're working on funding a stretch goal right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're like little slightly we're about $150. So we're like literally
So
$149 away from the stretch goal
that's
right now.
wouldn't it be great if we managed to during this stream get that over the
Oh, that
counter
would
and
be
get
amazing.
that. I'm just saying, people, if you're watching this and you think that sounds interesting, why not go to the link there and make that happen? So I actually haven't pledged it, so I'll be certainly doing that after this
Oh, thank
stream
you.
for
That's
sure.
awesome. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I love this game. But anyway.
So folks, if you do want to do that right now, you can go to
Mm-hmm.
bit.ly/broken game. But yeah, so we are trying to fund our stretch goal is
Mm-hmm.
a set of scenarios. And so I really wanted to do this scenario book, which was basically to bring 6 writers who aren't me to like write a set of pre-written scenarios for the game. So the 2 characters, their meet cute or how they met, their
Mm-hmm.
kind of backgrounds, and then like the traits that you become disillusioned with for them, and then a set of 10 objects to either collect or destroy. And I really wanted to bring in a different writers to see what they would do with it, what kind of scenario they would write for people to play in. And then if you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about playing Broken, people who pick up the book, they might not know what kind of story they want to play. There will be 6 pre-written stories they can jump into and make their own, and play through them and play those characters, and or get inspired by them. Like, you might read one, like one of the ones that we're gonna do is a vampire scenario. So you might read that and get
Okay.
inspired by it and say like, oh well,
Mm-hmm.
what if we did werewolves instead, or I don't know, something along those lines.
The vampire one's an interesting one because you're immortal, and I imagine
Yeah.
your relationship if you're immortal is different to if you're not. It's
Yeah,
goes a long
absolutely.
way.
That's what makes me excited about that scenario, because I want to see what the person does with that, as far and what people do with it when they play it, as far as time. Like this idea of like being in on a relationship with somebody that takes place
Mm-hmm.
over hundreds of years potentially could be really
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely. And the range of different objects you could have as well if you were playing over a time of history as well could be really different. Those scenarios sound awesome. You're so close to getting that goal, so I hope that gets achieved soon. Like I said, the link is in the show notes up on the screen now and in the comments if you're watching live.
Yeah.
I just pledged while we're talking then,
Oh,
so
thank
it's
you
very
so
quick
much.
and easy to do. So please, I'd recommend to go and do that. I also noticed Samantha Lee did
Yeah.
like a musical kind of collection playlist for you for that.
That's right. There
Um,
is a curated official playlist there by Sam, who is the designer of the game Anamnesis. I think is she going to be on this show? I think I saw that.
She is coming on the show later this month in a few weeks' time as well, which is why I noticed it and I was like, oh, okay.
She's
So
also
she's coming on the show to talk about her game soon.
Yeah, she's also one of our stretch goal writers. She's one of the scenario writers. So if
Oh,
we hit
amazing.
that stretch goal, Sam's going to write one of our scenarios. She's such a
Perfect.
great game designer, and she's really great at making those playlists. So yeah, if folks want to go check out the campaign page, you can. I always tell people, hit play on the playlist, start
Mm-hmm.
listening to the music, get in the mindset, get in the mood, and then read about the campaign. If people want to, also there is 3 of them left where you can back at $50 and play a game of Broken with me. So if folks want to play with me, the creator,
Oh,
there is
okay.
still 3 of those hanging out there. You have to
And would
scroll all the
that
way to the bottom to get to them. Sorry,
will that
go
be
ahead.
streamed as an actual play, or will that just be like a
No, it'll just be
private
a thing.
one? Just
Yeah, just a thing for that person.
Mhm.
Just will be I didn't even think about that, but if someone really wanted to stream it, we could potentially talk about that. But no, it's more of just like if someone wants to play with the creator, they can back at that level and then
That's
play a
cool.
game with me.
Amazing. That all sounds really, really great. We are coming up to near the top of the hour. So if you are watching live and you have any questions, now is the time to put it in the chat and ask us. Although, of course, I'm sure if you have any questions afterwards, or if you're listening to the podcast, if you go on social media, losing the words, to that Gamer Priest, I'm sure Ben would be happy to answer your questions later about the game.
Absolutely, of course.
And all the links again are on the crowdfunding page as well for all the various kind of ways to get in touch. So Ben, I would usually now say, is there anything you want to tell us about the game that you haven't had the chance to yet, or is there a question you wish I would have asked that you'd like to answer?
No, nothing kind of springs to mind. I'll just say that as the campaign has gone on, and I already kind of did touch on this, but I've just been so surprised, I guess, like I don't know if surprised is exactly the right word because it's what I wanted the game to be, but like the variety of stories that people have used it, have
Mm-hmm.
told with it, like has just been really cool. And I wanted to
Yeah.
make the game to be flexible so people could tell a wide variety of stories. It's like one of those things where like you try to gain something and you think you have, but then like seeing that happen has been really cool. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that's just like one thing I would just echo is that it tells of like a really wide variety of stories. So if folks are like, oh, I don't know if I want to play a breakout game, you'd be surprised at like what you can do with it. Or
Mm-hmm.
like, even if like, oh, I don't know if romance sounds like my genre. Like, one of the games that we did was a father and son
Mm-hmm.
partnership who they owned a business together, and
Okay.
they ended up So like I suddenly feel like I'm making the game like I'm not trying like it's a romance game and it's certainly a breakup game, and so most of the stories are probably going to be that people play. But I've just been really amazed at how flexible the game can be and like the really wide variety of stories that it can tell.
Yeah.
So
I think definitely. And I think even within just like romance, there's so many different stories I could instantly think of just from the different relationships and the complications for it. First of all, if you were just if the age you are, like if you were just in high school and you're breaking up, or if you've been married, or if you have children and made a family together, or if you, there's so many different situations. And also, like you say, if you think about it from the perspective, if you're role playing from somebody that's like perhaps a different culture or faith from you, think about how that would be a different story to influence kind of that decision.
absolutely.
So yeah, I think there's a huge amount of replayability in this, and I'm very excited about it. The other question I have for you, which I ask everyone, is what games would you recommend that aren't games you've made and that are not D&D?
Yeah, so if folks are really interested in like the romance genre or adjacent, one of my favorite games that was very influential on Broken was definitely Starcrossed by Alex Roberts, which is a game where you
Mm-hmm.
use a Jenga tower to uh, to play a like star-crossed lovers kind of romance.
Okay.
And like we want to be together, but we don't for different reasons kind of story. And it's like high tension. It's really good and really fun. And
Mm-hmm.
the romance trilogy from Emily Care Boss is also just a really great collection of 3 romance games that I really enjoy. I also am a really big fan of superhero genre and especially young superheroes. So Masks, the Powered by the Apocalypse game,
Mm-hmm.
is just absolutely one of my favorite games.
Yeah.
I also GM an actual play of it called
Mm-hmm.
Delinquent Comics, and I just love. So one of our scenarios in our stretch goal for the stretch goal I mentioned will be a young superhero one. I just love young superhero stories, and so yeah, Masks is definitely one of my favorite games. I actually thought about recommending Anamnesis, but you said Sam's going to be on the show in a
Well,
couple of
you
weeks.
can recommend it, and we'll have her on in a few weeks to delve into more details.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Anamnesis is a solo game, and I adore it. And then one more, if I might pitch one more,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's if folks are interested in like the ritual aspect of play that I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned and maybe a kind of religious game, there is Ma Nishtana, Why Is This Night Different, which is
Mm-hmm.
written by Gabrielle Rabinowitz and Ben Masagno, and it tells the story of it's a basically a Passover game. It's inspired
Oh,
by the
okay.
Passover Seder, written by 2 Jewish game designers, and you use ritual play to tell a retelling, a reframing of the Passover story,
Oh,
and it's
wow.
a really, really amazingly well designed game. So, and of course, there's all of our those are games that are not ours, but Apon Games has other games, and I would definitely say people should go to apongames.com and check out our games.
I mean, of course, who wouldn't do that? And links up on the screen there for people listening, and in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast there. Well, that's taken us up to the top of the hour, Ben. So I'm gonna start to wrap up the show there and
Yeah,
say thank you so much
thank
for your
you.
time. Thank you for coming on and sharing your game with us. I'm very excited about it, and I've definitely backed to support, pledged to support the game. And if everyone else would, that would be fantastic. The links are there because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their things. Um, so we will be back with Not D&D next Monday. So next week we have Brave Zenith, which I'm very excited about. So this is a post-fantasy RPG, which is inspired by Brazilian culture. And it's a very different kind of storytelling mechanic again. So something very new, very different, which I'm very excited to share with you. And that'll be next Monday at 10 p.m. BST live streaming. Or of course you can listen to the podcast. Just look at Not D&D wherever you're listening to this, I suppose. But on that note, thank you very much to everyone that came along and watched us live. And again, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, no problem. And if you have any other projects in the future, I'd be more than happy to have you back on again. So stay in touch.
Awesome. Definitely.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much then. Bye.